this hour. The curtain will be drawn on the African Summit taking place in Abuja, Nigeria's capital city, at about 4 p.m. today. About an hour ago, the African leaders went into a breakfast meeting with their host, President Goodluck Jonathan. Now, the President and other African leaders of the AU and the United Nations says the African continent must begin to de-emphasize reliance on external funding and importation of essential medicines required for treatment programs. They also adopted a proposal to establish an African Center for Disease Control. Our correspondent Doris Okewa reports.
Heads of state and governments of the African Union were led by their host, Nigeria's President Goodluck Jonathan, as they filed into the Abuja +12 summit with the theme Ownership, Accountability and Sustainability of HIV/AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria Response in Africa. The summit will serve as an assessment platform for the pledge made 12 years ago in 2001 by African heads of state and governments to make HIV/AIDS a priority issue and commit at least 15% of their annual budgets to the health sector. A major success in the fight against HIV/AIDS is the steady decline in new infections, but many challenges still persist.
The annual number of people newly infected with HIV in Africa has fallen by 25% since 2001.
We have less than 1,000 days until the MDG's deadline in 2015. Now, we have done a lot. The goals seem to be set, but if we are going to achieve it, we still need to do a lot more.
Further analysis show that many African countries are off the track to attain the Millennium Development Goals relating to healthcare. Panelists call for strategic interventions even after the deadline of 2015.
In this regard, we need to adopt the right policies, programs and the strategies, as well as demonstrate the necessary political commitment and strong leadership.
Most of the commodities we require and that require quality assurance from the World Health Organization are, however, not manufactured in Africa.
The position of Nigeria's president, which was widely supported by other leaders present, was the need for African leaders to assume ownership of their people's healthcare needs.
We must, with increased urgency, develop a stronger, homegrown, sustainable health financial framework. We must take ownership of the process and drive its implementation.
The president also unveiled the Nigerian Program of Action, which he describes as a presidential response plan for HIV/AIDS.
Currently, almost 80%, or to be specific, in some countries 90%, of the commodities for treating persons living with HIV and even test kits come from donors.
It is expected, most importantly, that arising from this summit, a clear-cut action plan will emerge on how to translate the many recommendations for eradicating HIV/AIDS, malaria and other infectious diseases from Africa. Doris Okewa, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, one of the leaders in attendance at yesterday's opening session of the AU summit is Sudan's President Omar Al-Bashir, who ironically has 2 international arrest warrants issued against him by the International Criminal Court, the ICC. In 2009 and 2010, the ICC issued 2 warrants of arrest against Al-Bashir over the conflict in Sudan's Darfur region, where government forces and local Arab militias are fighting rebels drawn mainly from black African populations. Since he was indicted by the ICC in 2006 after being accused of masterminding atrocities during the Darfur conflict, which left hundreds of thousands dead, he has been refused trips to Uganda, South Africa, Malawi and Zambia. Only Chad and Djibouti have received him in the past year. His visit to Nigeria is seen as his first to the West African region since the warrants were issued. The African Union has so far repeatedly spoken of its reservation over the ICC's warrants, stressing that it will not respect the decision of the court.
And a human rights group has asked the federal government to arrest the Sudanese President Omar Al-Bashir and deliver him to the International Criminal Court to stand trial for alleged crimes in Darfur. The group filed a suit at the Federal High Court Abuja to compel President Goodluck Jonathan to support the demand by the international community for justice for the victims of genocides and war crimes while ensuring the arrest of Mr. Al-Bashir. The chairman of the Nigerian Coalition for the ICC Steering Committee, Mr. Chino Obiago, told newsmen in Abuja that Nigeria's diplomatic reputation will further deteriorate if the country fails to arrest Mr. Al-Bashir.
It will amount to grave diplomatic blunder for the Jonathan administration to invite and give full ceremonial reception to war crime indictee in disregard of millions of victims of Darfur atrocities and their families, some of them Nigerian citizens who are still crying for justice. The judiciary in this country has a responsibility to implement legal obligations created by treaty undertaken by Nigeria. As a state party to the Rome Statute of the ICC, Nigeria is under legal obligation to execute within its national territory the arrest warrants issued by the trial chambers of the ICC against Mr. Al-Bashir while he is in his national territory.